Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're gearing up for your CA exams or just want to deeply understand the world of auditing, you've landed in the right place. Today, we are diving deep into Chapter 2 of General Auditing Principles and Auditors' Responsibilities, covering key standards on auditing, SA to 40, SA to 50, SA to 60, SA to 99, and SA 402. This is a crucial chapter, packed with concepts you absolutely must master. So, grab your notes, hit that like button, and let's get started. First up, SA to 40, the auditor's responsibility relating to fraud in an audit of financial statements. This standard is all about understanding and dealing with fraud. Let's start with the basics. What's the difference between fraud and error? Fraud is an intentional act by management, those charged with governance, TCWG, employees, or third parties, using deception to gain an unjust advantage. Think deliberate manipulation. Error, on the other hand, is simply an unintentional misstatement. Misstatements in financial statements can arise from either. Now, SA to 40 focuses on two types of intentional misstatements relevant to the auditor. Fraudulent financial reporting. This is when FS are intentionally misstated to deceive users. It often involves management's efforts to manage earnings and can be done by manipulating records, misrepresenting or omitting information, or misapplying accounting principles. A common technique is management override of controls, things like recording fictitious journal entries, inappropriately adjusting estimates, or concealing facts. Misappropriation of assets. This is essentially theft of an entity's assets. It can be small-scale employee theft, or larger, more concealed acts by management. Examples include embezzling receipts, stealing physical assets, or using company assets for personal gain. Now, a critical point, whose primary responsibility is it to prevent and detect fraud? It rests squarely with TCWG and management. The auditor's role? To obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. But remember, due to the inherent limitations of an audit, there's always an unavoidable risk that some material misstatements, especially those from fraud, might not be detected. Why? Because fraud often involves sophisticated concealment, collusion, and management override. Detecting management fraud is even harder than employee fraud. If an auditor identifies or suspects fraud, they must communicate it to management. If management is involved, it goes straight to TCWG. Plus, there might be a responsibility to report to regulatory authorities, especially for companies, as per Section 143(12) of the Companies Act, 2013, and CARO, 2020. So, how do auditors spot potential fraud? They look for fraud risk factors, events, or conditions that indicate an incentive, pressure, or opportunity to commit fraud. For fraudulent financial reporting, these factors fall into three categories. Incentives pressures, think financial instability, high competition, declining demand, recurring negative cash flows, external expectations, analyst forecasts, need for financing, or personal financial situations of management, compensation tied to targets, personal guarantees. Opportunities. This relates to the nature of the industry, complex transactions, related party deals, ineffective management monitoring, complex organizational structures, or deficient internal controls. Attitudes rationalizations. This is about the mindset, a history of legal violations, attempts to justify inappropriate accounting, low morale, or excessive interest in stock price. For misappropriation of assets, the risk factors are similar. Incentives pressures, personal financial obligations of employees with access to cash, or adverse relationships between the entity and its employees, like layoffs or unfair promotions. Opportunities. characteristics of assets, large amounts of cash, small high-value inventory, easily convertible assets, or inadequate internal controls over assets, poor segregation of duties, lack of physical safeguards. Attitudes rationalizations, disregard for internal controls, tolerance of petty theft, or changes in lifestyle indicating misappropriation. The engagement team must discuss how and where F.S might be susceptible to fraud, even if they believe management is honest. Auditors perform risk assessment procedures like inquiring of management and evaluating unexpected relationships. Their responses to assessed risks include assigning appropriate personnel, evaluating accounting policies, and incorporating unpredictability in audit procedures. Crucially, auditors design procedures specifically to address the risk of management override of controls. This includes testing journal entries, reviewing accounting estimates for biases, and evaluating the business rationale for unusual transactions. What if the auditor cannot continue the engagement due to fraud? They must determine their professional and legal responsibilities, consider withdrawing, and if they do, discuss the reasons with management TCWG and report to regulatory authorities if required. Finally, management representations are key. Management must acknowledge responsibility for internal controls to prevent fraud, disclose their fraud risk assessment results, and inform the auditor of any known or suspected fraud. All significant findings and communications about fraud must be documented by the auditor. Moving on to SA 250, consideration of laws and regulations in an audit of financial statements. This standard deals with how auditors handle non-compliance. Non-compliance means acts of omission or commission by the entity that are contrary to prevailing laws. It doesn't include personal misconduct by management. SA 250 doesn't apply to engagements specifically designed to report on compliance. Laws and regulations can significantly affect financial statements. Some have a direct effect on F.S, like tax or labor laws. For these, the auditor must obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, SAAE, about compliance. Other laws don't have a direct effect but are fundamental to the business's operations, like environmental regulations. For these, the auditor's responsibility is limited to specified procedures to identify non-compliance that could have a material effect. The responsibility for compliance rests with management. They must ensure operations follow laws, have policies for prevention and detection of non-compliance, monitor legal requirements, operate internal controls, and maintain a code of conduct. The auditor's responsibility is not to prevent non-compliance, and they can't be expected to detect all non-compliance. There are inherent limitations because many laws don't affect F.S, non-compliance can be concealed, and ultimately, a court determines if an act is non-compliant. Auditors must maintain professional skepticism. When considering compliance, auditors need to understand the legal framework and how the entity complies. Obtain SAAE for laws directly affecting FS. Perform procedures, inquiries, inspecting correspondence to identify non-compliance with other laws that may materially affect FS. Remain alert to any audit procedures that might reveal non-compliance. Obtain written representations from management TCWG that all known instances of non-compliance have been disclosed. Indications of non-compliance can include investigations by regulators, payments for unspecified services, excessive agent fees, unusual transactions with tax havens, or adverse media comments. If non-compliance is identified or suspected, the auditor must understand its nature and circumstances, discuss it with management TCWG, and if necessary, obtain legal advice. If SAAE cannot be obtained, they must evaluate the effect on their opinion. Reporting non-compliance to TCWG. Communicate if non-compliance has a material effect and isn't adequately reflected in FS. If intentional and material, communicate promptly. In auditor's report, if material non-compliance isn't reflected, express a qualified or adverse opinion. If scope is limited, a qualified opinion or disclaimer. To regulatory and enforcement authorities, determine if there's a responsibility to report to parties outside the entity, as the auditor's legal responsibilities may override confidentiality. Closely related to SA 250 is NOCLAR, non-compliance with laws and regulations. This concept applies to professional accountants, whether in service or in public practice. NOCLAR covers intentional or unintentional acts contrary to laws committed by the client, TCWG, management, or other individuals working for the client. It doesn't cover personal misconduct. Examples covered include fraud, corruption, money laundering, data protection breaches, environmental violations, and tax liabilities. Key facts about NOCLAR. It applies if an accountant encounters non-compliance during a service, they aren't required to investigate for complete compliance. Accountants are expected to apply professional judgment and expertise, but not to have knowledge of laws beyond what's required for the engagement. Matters that are clearly inconsequential or relate to personal misconduct are out of scope. Disclosure contrary to law is not required. The objective of NOCLAR is to increase awareness among professional accountants of their legal and regulatory responsibilities. Turning a blind eye is not an appropriate response. NOCLAR versus SA 250. While SA 250 applies only to audits, NOCLAR applies to professional accountants in both service and practice. NOCLAR goes further by considering non-compliance that causes substantial harm with serious consequences, and it includes a crucial imminent breach provision. If an accountant becomes aware of an imminent breach that would cause substantial harm to stakeholders, they must consider disclosing it to the appropriate authority after discussing with management TCWG. This provision is not in SA 250. In India, NOCLAR applies to senior professional accountants in service, KMP of listed entities, and to audit engagements of listed entities with a net worth of 250 crore rupees or more. Documentation requirements for NOCLAR include how management TCWG responded, the course of action considered, judgments made, and how the accountant is satisfied that their public interest responsibility has been fulfilled. Next, SA 260, Communication with TCWG. This standard outlines the auditor's responsibility to communicate with those charged with governance. TCWG are the people responsible for overseeing the entity's strategic direction, accountability, and financial reporting process. This could include the board of directors, an audit committee, or even an owner-manager. Effective two-way communication is vital. It helps both the auditor and TCWG understand audit matters, builds a working relationship, helps the auditor get relevant information, and assists TCWG in overseeing financial reporting, which in turn reduces the risk of material misstatement. So, what matters must the auditor communicate? Auditor's responsibilities. Clarify that the auditor expresses an opinion on F.S prepared by management with TCWG oversight, and that the audit doesn't relieve management TCWG of their responsibilities. Plan scope and timing of the audit. This helps TCWG understand the audit's implications and helps the auditor understand the entity, but care must be taken not to compromise audit effectiveness. Significant findings from the audit. This is broad, including the auditor's views on qualitative aspects of accounting practices, significant difficulties encountered, matters discussed with management, unless all TCWG are involved in managing the entity, written representations requested, and circumstances affecting the auditor's report, like going concern or key audit matters. any other significant matters relevant to the oversight of the financial reporting process. Significant difficulties can include delays by management, unavailability of personnel or information, unreasonable timelines, or restrictions imposed by management. Auditors also communicate significant matters discussed with management, such as important events, business conditions, concerns about management's consultations with other accountants, and disagreements with management. If the auditor expects to modify their opinion, include a material uncertainty related to going concern, or include key audit matters, they should provide TCWG with a draft report. For listed entities, auditors must also communicate their independence. This includes a statement of compliance with ethical requirements, disclosure of all relationships that might bear on independence, including total fees for audit and non-audit services, and the safeguards applied to mitigate any threats. The communication process should ideally be in writing for significant findings, especially for independence for listed entities, and always on a timely basis. The auditor must evaluate the adequacy of two-way communication and take action if it's not sufficient. All oral communications must be documented and written communications retained. Let's move on to SA 299, Joint Audit of Financial Statements. This standard applies when two or more auditors audit an entity's financial statements together. SA 299 doesn't cover the relationship between a principal auditor and another auditor for a component, like a branch. In audit planning, risk assessment, and allocation of work, engagement partners from each joint auditor must be involved. They should identify and divide audit areas or define common areas, ascertain reporting objectives and plan communications, communicate factors directing the team's efforts, consider preliminary engagement activities, ascertain necessary resources. Each joint auditor assesses ROM, and they discuss and document procedures for common and specific areas. They obtain a common engagement letter and a common management representation letter. A signed work allocation document is crucial to avoid disputes. Regarding responsibility and coordination, each joint auditor is responsible only for the work allocated to them. If a joint auditor finds matters relevant to others, they must communicate it in writing before audit completion. However, all joint auditors are jointly and severally responsible for audit work not divided and carried out by all. Decisions made during planning for common areas. Matters brought to their notice where there's agreement. Examining F.S. compliance with statutes. Presentation and disclosure as per AFRF. Ensuring the audit report complies with statutes. For audit conclusion and reporting, joint auditors are generally required to issue a common audit report. But, if they disagree on the opinion or any matters, they must express their opinion in a separate audit report. A joint auditor isn't bound by the majority view. If separate reports are issued, they must reference each other under an other matter paragraph as per SA 706. They also discuss conclusions before finalizing. Each joint auditor is entitled to assume that others have performed their work according to as brought significant observations to notice, and that component F.S audited by one joint auditor comply with laws and regulations. Finally, communication with TCWG is still important. If joint auditors expect to modify their opinion or include an EOM paragraph, they communicate the circumstances and proposed wording to TCWG. Our final standard for today, SA 402, Audit Considerations Relating to an Entity Using a Service Organization. This is vital in today's outsourced world. Let's define some terms. Service organization, a third party providing services to a user entity, example payroll processing, IT services. User entity, the entity using the service organization, whose F.S are being audited. Service auditor, the auditor who reports on the controls of the service organization. User auditor, the auditor auditing the user entity's FS. Sub-service organization, a service organization used by another service organization. Services are relevant to the audit if they are part of the user entity's information system relevant to financial reporting, affecting transactions, records, or the F.S preparation process. Obtaining an understanding of the services involves understanding how the user entity uses the service organization, including the nature and significance of services, materiality of transactions affected, degree of interaction, and contractual terms. The user auditor also needs to understand the internal controls related to these services. If they can't get sufficient understanding, they can obtain a Type 1 or Type 2 report from the service auditor. Contact the service organization through the user entity. Visit the service organization. Use another auditor to perform procedures at the service organization. Let's clarify Type 1 and Type 2 reports. A Type 1 report describes the service organization's system, control objectives, and related controls, along with the service auditor's opinion on this description. A Type 2 report includes everything in a Type 1 report, plus a description of the service auditor's tests of controls and their results, including operating effectiveness over a specified period. When using these reports as audit evidence. For understanding, the user auditor assesses the service auditor's competence and independence and the adequacy of the reporting standards. For audit evidence on design and implementation of controls, they evaluate if the description and design are for an appropriate period, the adequacy of the time period covered by tests, and the sufficiency of evidence. They also determine if complementary user entity controls the service organization assumes the user entity will implement, are designed and implemented. If SAAE isn't available for assessed ROM, the user auditor performs further procedures or uses another auditor. For tests of controls, if the user auditor expects controls at the service organization to be effective, they can obtain a Type 2 report, perform tests themselves, or use another auditor. For sub-service organizations, the service auditor's report can either include inclusive method or exclude carve-out method, the sub-service organization's controls. If excluded, the user auditor must apply SA40 to requirements to the sub-service organization. Finally, reporting by the user auditor. If the user auditor can't obtain SAAE regarding services, they must modify their opinion as per SA705. Reference to service auditor's work. Generally, the user auditor should not refer to the service auditor's work in an unmodified opinion, unless required by law. If required, they must state that the reference doesn't diminish their own responsibility. If the reference is relevant to understanding a modified opinion, they can refer to it, again stating it doesn't diminish their responsibility. And there you have it. A comprehensive breakdown of Chapter 2. We've covered the nuances of fraud under SA240, the critical considerations of laws and regulations in SA250 and NOCLAR, the importance of communication with TCWG in SA260, the dynamics of joint audits in SA299, and the complexities of service organizations in SA402. Each of these standards is interconnected and vital for a thorough audit. Make sure you understand the responsibilities, the procedures, and the reporting implications for each. If you found this video helpful, please give it a big thumbs up, share it with your study buddies, and subscribe for more in-depth auditing content. Let me know in the comments below which topic you'd like me to cover next. Keep studying hard, and I'll see you in the next video.